Good afternoon and welcome to the delegation of the Ismaili Imamate. My name is Khalil Sharif. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Aga Khan Foundation Canada. It's a great delight to welcome you all here today for today's session, both those of you who are here with us in person and the many of you who are joining us by live webcast from around the world. Many of you have been here before. For those of you who have not been here, the delegation of the Ismaili Imamate was established in 2008 by His Highness the Aga Khan, and at the time of the opening of this building, he expressed the aspiration that we might use this space to exchange ideas, stimulate discussion and collaboration, open up new vistas that might help us reflect on Canada's role in creating a more peaceful, prosperous, and pluralist world. And it has been one of the great privileges for Aga Khan Foundation Canada to be able to convene in this space issues that help the development sector in Canada and hopefully around the world improve the way in which they support improvements in quality of life for people the world over. This event is part of a series that we are doing called on measuring development impact, and it was launched several weeks ago with a session led by Iqbal Dhaliwal, who is the Deputy Director of the Poverty Action Lab at MIT. If you have not seen that session, it's available on the website and on the AKF Canada YouTube page. I encourage you to see it if you haven't. You'll find it fascinating discussion and stimulating about the role of randomized control trials in addressing development problems. Today we continue this discussion about impact from a very importantly different starting point. What we're talking about today is called the Social Observatory, Adaptive Learning in Development Projects. And we have with us a very, very distinguished leader from the World Bank group, Dr. Biju Rao. I won't recite the details of his biography. They're on your chairs, but you'll see from even a quick glance that he is someone who brings decades of experience and intellectual rigor to the issues that we are discussing. I am particularly excited about this session for three reasons. The first one is that I have long felt that the World Bank represents a treasure trove of knowledge resources that we don't systematically access sufficiently here. And so this, having Dr. Rao here is another attempt at increasing the crosswalks between the Canadian development community and the knowledge resources of the World Bank. The second reason I'm very excited about this is we often talk about what impact a project has had, but we don't often talk about how it has had that impact, and we don't often talk about what we do with the information that comes about from asking the question of what impact. And the issue of learning from our impact studies, of learning from our data collection is central and is probably the hardest thing that confronts us in implementation of development projects. And this is an issue that Dr. Rao has thought about very, very hard and then done things about. And so having him here to discuss this with us is very, very, very exciting. The third reason I'm excited about this is we often talk about this under the rubric of M&E, monitoring and evaluation, and E gets all the work and all the attention, but the M is maybe more important. And we have not, for some time, really thought about methodological innovation in monitoring. And I think this is actually a very, very important issue when we're talking about implementation. And again, this is an area where Dr. Rao has spent a lot of time thinking and doing, and so we will have the chance to benefit from that today. So we're very excited, in short, about the opportunity to engage with Dr. Rao. He, of course, has been particularly interested in the question of scaling up and how it is that small successes can become medium-sized successes, can become large-scale successes, and the learning that needs to go along for all that to happen. So with that brief introduction, what we'll do is ask Dr. Rao to address us, and then we'll open it up for a discussion with him. So your questions, both here in person and those of you who are joining us by webcast, will be more than welcome. So with that, I turn it over to Dr. Rao and ask you to join me in welcoming him to Ottawa.
Thanks, Khalil. Okay. Thanks. It's a real pleasure to speak to all of you, and it's an honor. I am a huge fan of the Aga Khan Foundation and it's all its wonderful work, which I'm reasonably familiar with. So it's a pleasure to talk to all of you. We hopefully won't have any technological glitches. So let me just plunge in and let's see how far we can get. I want to talk about the Social Observatory, and let me just plunge right in and start with a bit of what we call loosely theory. It's not something that's terribly sophisticated, but I think gives some background. That, when we think about the development problem, when you talk to economists about it, they generally talk about it as a problem of market failure. Markets don't work because of inequality that results in asymmetric information or inequalities in information, problems of coordination that makes not everybody benefit from the advantages of markets, and particularly poverty is a problem that comes from that. The general answer to that is the state should come and then provide these resources. And that sort of, has been a very long-standing solution to problems of market failure, goes back, maybe 2,000 years. Now, what economists have discovered in the last 20, 30 years is that the problems that we see in markets also affect states. So states also have problems of coordination, corruption, and other things that make states ineffective in delivering the services that we want states to do, particularly in developing countries. So for a long time, the problem of development was thought was a sort of intersection between state failure and market failure. And the World Bank and other organizations, including the Aga Khan Foundation, felt that the answer was to go to citizens, right? So we go to citizens, communities, villages around the world, give them the resources necessary to help themselves, essentially, self-help using social capital, other concepts like that. Well, what we need to also understand that just as there's market failure with markets, government failure with states, we also have civil society failure with civil society. Problems of coordination and collective action are central to the challenge of getting communities to work together. That's not easy stuff, yeah? So development is a mess. Basically, no solutions anywhere, right? It's a hard problem. Any of us who work in development know that to be true, right? So we can't really have easy solutions. Now, what has happened over the last 20 years, perhaps particularly in development organizations, are attempts to use civil society. I'm going to use that in the broad sense of the power of citizens, power of communities, to solve development problems, right? Now, when you start doing development to work with communities, particularly when you're trying to rebuild these communities, make them work well together, when you're trying to make states work better, development has to function differently. If you look at large development agencies, including mine, the World Bank, we tend to work with 3 to 5 year project horizons, right? You don't build communities in 3 to 5 years. You don't repair states in 3 to 5 years. It's a long-term process. And secondly, we don't quite know how that long-term process is going to go. When you build a bridge, you can have an engineer come in and make the measurements and have the construction fellow come in and make put the cement in the concrete and build the bridge, and you have an immediate impact, right? And you can really predict where that impact is going to go. When I tell you to go and work with communities and fix community problems, if you're not adaptive, if you're not reflexive, if you're not constantly observing and learning and adapting, you're going to fail. One of the biggest examples of a project that has absorbed that lesson is, in fact, the Aga Khan Rural Support Program, which realized this problem a long time ago and built into its own systems ways of learning by doing and fixing and experimenting constantly in order to expand. That kind of works up to a point. When you start hitting, and I don't know what that number is, I'm going to make up a number, say 100,000 people, right? Beneficiaries. Just a number I've made up, but it really differs depending on the context. You start losing that ability. Because, you can work with 10 villages. It's very easy. I can personally visit. You have a small NGO with 10 villages, personally visit all those 10 villages on a regular basis, have somebody there to do it for you. You kind of know what's going on. You can fix the problems as you go along. Go to 100 villages, gets a little more difficult. 1,000 villages gets even more difficult. You go to 10,000 villages like our projects in the World Bank do, you're lost, right? So scaling up is a problem that's centrally tied to the challenge of adaptive learning. The ability to see in different ways, to learn from what you see, and to absorb those lessons to adapt. If you don't do that well, you're not going to do development well at scale, particularly with what we call complex interventions. Complex interventions are those where every village has to have a slightly different intervention, has to have a village-specific, a community-specific intervention, because the problems are going to be differing according to the context, according to the social structure of the village, the political structure of the village, and so on. How do you get that to happen and do it well at scale? Yeah? If you have a big, vaccination program, you're kind of in better space to do it. You don't need all this stuff as much. You actually might benefit there too, but less so than in a community development program. Okay? So what is an adaptive system? How do we do it? And where does it come from? Now, there's been an enormous, let me not get to the rhetoric on this, but think of the contrast with the RCT talk you heard from Iqbal Dhaliwal, which is randomized control trials, a very, very centrally important tool that's made a huge contribution to development in recent years. But the goal of the randomized control trial is to get your design right? You test a design, keeping everything else constant, do it as rigorously as possible, and you get a result to say the design worked or didn't work. In other words, you're trying to use the tools of public health and medicine, which is a randomized control trial, to discover if your pill works. If you want to take a therapeutic version of this, you're trying to discover the next Prozac. You're trying to discover the next pill that's going to solve the problem of development, which is important. Design is central. It's important. I'm not trying to do, but it's one aspect. To me, the challenge of learning in development, of measuring in development, is more like therapy, like psychotherapy. It requires a long-term engagement of learning by doing, adapting, shifting, moving, with some medical help perhaps, but that's one aspect of many things you do. Yeah? So I think of it as development as therapy as opposed to development as Prozac, the way, as you'll see, do a lot of Prozac as well. This approach to development is not new, this adaptive approach. It goes back to Hirschman's wonderful book, Development Projects Observed, and from 1967. I highly encourage you to all read that. Albert Hirschman is one of my heroes and should be everybody's hero, I think. And a lot of people, including myself, have since then have written about this stuff. Yeah? But all this writing you see, all these citations you see, are talk. It's really a lot of talk. Nobody's actually done it. There's a lot of people have theorized about it, including me. What happened was, a couple of years ago, I did this book, which is all about, it's called Localizing Development as Participation Work. It's jointly authored by my friend Ghazala Mansouri and myself. This book is a World Bank policy research report, but what we did is we looked at community projects and participatory projects, citizen-led projects from around the world, from a theoretical perspective, from an empirical perspective, and showed you why they don't work as well as they can, and then said how we can work them better. It's a free download on the internet if you're interested. Yeah? And the Social Observatory came about because the then vice president of the World Bank at that time, Isabel Guerrero, happened to be a friend of mine, read this book. It created a bit of a stir when it came out. And she said, it's easy for you to talk. Come and fix our programs. You have a $2 billion portfolio of participatory programs in India, your home country. Come and fix them. And that was a challenge I couldn't refuse. And that's what made the Social Observatory happen, which was to take the lessons from this book and translate it into actual practice. And we've been doing that for 4 or 5 years now. And I want to report on some of the things that we have done. We've by no means solved the problem, but I think we have a few lessons that might be nice to share. Okay. Now, what are the principles of the Social Observatory? Firstly, it's what I call embedded research. It's not the kind of research like embedded reporting in the Iraq War, okay? We actually sit with these projects. It's not like I sit in Washington with my team, do my research, fly in, for a couple of weeks, fly back out. We live there. My gang lives in the project offices, yeah? And interacts with the M&E in charge of the JEEVIKA project, Ajit Ranjan, who's become a great collaborator of ours, the M&E in charge of the Tamil Nadu Puduvalvu project, Shajivana, who's a person who works with wonderful, one of the best people I've ever worked with in development. These are our partners. Yeah? It's not the vice president of South Asia. That she's very distant from these folks. Yeah? And what we try to do, so that idea of collaborating, having that dialogue all the time with the actual implementers of this stuff is central. Secondly, it's interdisciplinary. I've, throughout my career, believed that the distinction of having an economist not talking to a sociologist, not talking to political science is the stupidest thing that human beings came up with. We have to talk to each other, learn how to collaborate in order to make the world a better place. Okay? And we have to have that interdisciplinary collaboration. So we work with everybody. We have sociologists, political scientists, economists, computer specialists, visualization experts, all kinds of people working together for this. And the objective is research not to publish a paper. I do publish, I need to keep my job, but research for better implementation, A, and to help projects build a culture or adaptation, or building adaptive capacity. Those are our two goals. Yeah? Our partners, as I said, is the $2 billion portfolio of livelihoods projects in India, in 2 states of Bihar, when I know the Aga Khan Foundation does a lot of work, and Tamil Nadu in South India, but also in Odisha and Maharashtra. I don't know, you should, in the Aga Khan Foundation, be familiar with livelihoods projects, but let me just go over what they are. It's basically to form networks. It was invented by the Aga Khan Foundation, so the Aga Khan Rural Support Network. So I feel a little odd talking about it here. But anyway, in case you're not, it's basically to build networks of women's self-help groups, right? You form these self-help groups of between 7 to 8 women for purposes of microcredit and savings. Those groups have a chairwoman that they elect and a bookkeeper that they elect. The chairwoman of all the groups in a village, about 14 to 15 groups in every village, forms a village organization that creates a sort of a institutional capacity for these livelihoods groups in that village and network. That's then federated into higher levels. From the village, you go to the block, to the district, to the state, and you have these women's organizations set up across the state doing this kind of work. That's the core intervention. The core intervention is to form the networks of women's self-help groups under the word pretext is perhaps too strong a word, but really for the purpose of microcredit and savings. But that's really the infrastructure. Once that has been set up, then you have the opportunity to roll out a whole bunch of what we call vertical development interventions on top of these women's networks. Nutrition interventions, domestic violence interventions, interventions for creating jobs and livelihoods, scholarship programs for kids. There were about 40 different verticals that have been developed, climate change programs, all kinds of stuff using these women's networks, right? So this becomes a core development intervention with verticals. It's a very, very central part in India of how they deal with poverty reduction. Aside from the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Support Program, the Mahatma Gandhi Employment Guarantee Scheme, which you might have heard of, which is, everybody's guaranteed 100 days of labor at a fair wage in rural India. This is the second biggest way of dealing with poverty programs in India. Yep. Now, our job is not to do the implementation. Our job is to work as a catalyst to make the implementation better. So there are 3 aspects to adaptive capacity that we work on. I'll be talking about each one of them briefly. You can get more information from the website, and I'm happy to answer questions. The first one is long-term feedback. If you came to the last lecture on randomized control trials, you will know that they take between 3 to 5 years to finish, 2 years, between 2 to 5 years to finish. You can't get everyday answers from this, but you get long-term answers. Did my program work or not? Did my intervention work or not? Bottom line, okay? And the best way of doing them is to do a randomized control trial. And I'll assume that you know enough about that, so I'm not going to go into what that is. It's a very central tool to what we do. But is that enough? You did an intervention, it didn't work. Then what? You walk away and say it didn't work. Somebody asks you, Khalil asks you, why? You don't know. So, again, the idea of disciplinarity comes in. My view is that you combine that with extremely rigorous ground-level work, with careful sociological, qualitative work, ethnographic work, to start unpacking what were the mechanisms that took place to make this program not work or work, so that you can replicate your successes and learn from your failures. Yeah? So we have that. So this long-term feedback mixes qualitative and quantitative methods to do mixed methods impact evaluations. Second one is everyday feedback, what you all know as management information systems, what we call decision support systems. The idea of using high-frequency census data from all your beneficiaries to figure out where things are working and where they're not. In the livelihoods projects, this is the credit records of every woman, the credit records of every group, which is they have weekly meetings, so weekly credit records and savings records. These are merged with a profile of every member of the group and put into a large database, updated every week, okay? So it is census data. In our case, I think between the 2 states, we have about 101.5 million members, women. Data on all of them is collected every week, yeah? And then presented via dashboards to management folks at every level of authority, from the cluster level, which is a cluster of villages, to the block level, to the district level, to the World Bank level. They get to see what these data are saying. Now, everybody says they do it, and I'm not going to comment on the Aga Khan's program's work because I don't know. I'll tell you about the World Bank's work, which we investigated very closely. Everybody's supposed to do it. 95% of these projects did not do it well. The data were made up, They were updated every 6 months rather than every week. There were no dashboards. The only dashboard you saw was when the World Bank project fellow, big shot came in, and he got to see some data not being used for everyday decision making. We tried to change that. And in Bihar, it took us 3.5 years. But now in the pilot district of Nalanda, which we've been working with very closely, we have solved the problem. We track every woman with weekly data, with dashboards available for everybody. If you're ever in Bihar, I encourage you to go and look at what we've done. I'm very proud of it. Not we, I mean, we, the Social Observatory, with the JEEVIKA project in Bihar, together. And Ajit Ranjan in particular being the MNE guy. And now we're expanding it to the whole state. It took us a lot of time. We were less successful in Tamil Nadu. I'm happy to answer the questions as to why. Third aspect is, very importantly, citizen feedback. We all know about PRAs. I'm going to show you a method we've developed called participatory-tracking, which is a way of giving the power of big data, of census data, to citizens, where they collect their own data to form an alternate narrative to whatever data the government is collecting, so they can have a data-based conversation and dialogue with the government, right? And track their own progress over time. I'll talk about all those three. Hopefully, I'll have time for all this. All right. Long-term feedback, let me go plunge right into the three aspects one by one. Let's start with long-term feedback. And we're looking at the mixed methods evaluations we've done in Bihar. We've done several of these. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm going to talk about one. I'm going to be talking about the JEEVIKA project, which works very closely with the Aga Khan program in India. The close collaborators with them on the JEEVIKA project. But this is a World Bank funded project. It started in 2006, phase one, with looking at 375,000 beneficiaries. It went up to phase two with 741. Phase three, we just started at 3 million, and the target is to cover the entire state with 12 million. Where did we come in? We came in 2011. And what we were asked to do first was to sort of do a backwards evaluation of the impact of the project between 2006 and 2011, over those 5 years. Obviously, we can't do an RCT, we can't do a randomized control trial, because it has to be, the program is over, that intervention is over, so we had to do retrospective evaluations. But what we started doing was to set up an RCT for phase two. It started in 2011, which we randomized. We did the RCT baseline data collection then, and we started our qualitative work in 2011 to go with the RCT. Okay? We finished the RCT work, the midline survey in 2015. We'll do an endline in 2016, but I'll give you the midline results. Our qualitative work ended in 2015. There were 12 cycles of qualitative work. Let me talk about what we found with all of this stuff. Okay. Let's first start with the results from the propensity score matched retrospective impact evaluation. This is a particular method that's not an RCT, but it's the best we could do at the time. And I'm happy to talk about the technicalities if you're interested. But I just want you to take a look at the results. Look at the impact of this program. This is the phase one program. Savings rates over those 5 years went up by 300%. The number of households with high-cost loans went down. Remember, these are all money lender societies. Bihar is India's poorest state with an extremely usurious, very patriarchal state. 44% reduction in money lender loans, essentially. And generally, the amount borrowed went down by 47%. And then look at all these sort of empowerment issues. They visited the village government meetings, went up by 500%. These are all women, by the way. They're talking about women in the world's most patriarchal society. Whether they visited a local shop in their own, went up by 21%. Whether they visited the local PDS, which is the fair price shop, the controlled price shops, buy their groceries, that went up by almost 60%. Visited a health center, went by 44%. But they visited a relative on their own, went up by 37%. And this is the impact of the program. This is not tracking everybody. This is, the difference in difference, the impact of the program over time. Yeah, and whether they report having an opinion on politics went up by 333%. We're talking about a transformation of women in these villages, and I explained to you exactly how that happened because we have qualitative work to show you how that happened, and that's a paper that you can download from the internet that we're trying to publish with two other co-authors and myself. Right? Qualitative methodology. I don't want to get into this in great detail, but we basically went to these villages over 12 rounds over those 3 years that we looked at them. We compared treatment and control villages over that period, where were matched on the basis of quantitative criteria. So we're looking at comparable villages tracked over time. We looked at 120 households that had joined the program, 50 villages that were non-joiners, 24 husbands. I mean, it's as extensive qualitative data as trust me on this. I'm not saying this because I'm like Donald Trump, but really, go and look at other pieces of qualitative work. It's about 10 times the sample size of most qualitative work you'll see. Yeah? We're looking at a very large qualitative sample. We're looking at a group of 5 ethnographers going to every village every quarter. Yeah? So it's very, very intense qualitative work. 10 villages tracked over 3 years. 5 treatment, 5 control. Right? And we did all sorts of fancy stuff with the coding. Here's what we found. You compare treatment. Treatment meaning JEEVIKA villages. Villages where JEEVIKA had gone in. Control villages meaning villages where JEEVIKA had not gone in, matched on the basis of various quantitative data to make them as similar as possible. The act of borrowing for a woman in a treatment village was less humiliating and done with more dignity when borrowing from a self-help group rather than borrowing from a moneylender. In a control area, borrowing was a form of begging. It was a form of active desperation. That idea of dignity is very important. The ability to obtain a loan in a treatment area depends on the collective capacity of the group. In a control area, it depends on that individual capacity to bargain. Decision on taking loans in treatment areas is made by the women themselves. In control areas, if women take loans, which usually they don't, it's done on behalf of their husbands. Information on village credit. Women are much better informed about credit markets, about interest rates, about all the various technical details about what these loans offer and how to borrow them. And in control areas, they know nothing. Yeah? So there's a clear sense of these outcomes that come up from the data, qualitative data. On social and political themes, women in treatment areas see themselves as participants in a public discourse, as political participants. In treatment areas, women see the public sphere as a masculine sphere. It's not something they would participate in. They're very happy to voice their opinions on local government in treatment areas, not in control areas. And on problem solving, in treatment areas, they have the capacity, these groups, to get together and solve the problems collectively. Women do. In treatment areas, they don't do that. In control areas, they don't do that. In treatment areas, women have begun to run for public office, for the position of village president, for running for elections as ward members. Remember, India has the biggest, most extensive system of village democracy in the world. Every village is run by a village committee, a council called the panchayat that has elections every 6 years, just like most parliaments. It's basically a parliamentary system. So you have these village elections that are a big part of village life. Women are now running for office on their own, not because of reserved seats for women, which happens all over India, but on their own. Okay? How did this change come about? JEEVIKA, this program, basically gave women a space, an institutional space of their own in the form of the village organization and these women's networks. Women's networks were not formed with women and their relatives, which is how women's networks are often formed. You were cutting across castes, cutting across religions, cutting across social classes. Women interacting in that village organization with people they never interacted with before, having meals with people from different religions, different castes. Bihar, you would not dream of a Brahmin woman sitting and having a cup of tea, chai, with a Dalit woman, a woman from a lower caste. You see it happening all the time in these treatment areas because they are now acting towards a common purpose. This idea of a self-help group is giving them the sense that there is a purpose beyond them. And JEEVIKA, the program, did this very explicitly. It said, forget your caste and your religious differences. We are bound by a new identity, and that's the identity of poverty. Right? Which overwhelms every other identity that we have. And we need to work together to solve that problem. I mean, I'm sounding like an advocate of these programs. If you read my work, you realize I really am not. I've been cursed out for hating participatory programs, which I don't at all. I just don't think they're implemented very well. I'm saying this because our data says this. Right? This is where I'm coming from. Yeah? So they had physical resources, group-based money, a passbook, a money box, yeah? Account books, symbolic resources, creating alternative identities that for women across castes, democratizing financial decision-making, right? This was done by the group, not by some big shot telling you what the loan is, and creating these rituals of change. Meet every week, say your slogans every week. They had these very hokey songs in Hindi that were all set to the tune of "We Shall Overcome," which is kind of interesting. But that really created a sense of identity, of collective identity that they didn't have before. Yeah, extraordinary change. Yeah, and just to give you a sense of this, compare these two pictures. You see that picture with the guy with his hand across his face. He's interviewing a woman in a control village. She will not come out from behind that door. He cannot see her face. She's in parda. Yeah? And that's the treatment woman. I mean, I mean, just to show you pictorially how the whole thing has changed. She's sitting there talking to him one-on-one. I would talk to you. Yeah? It's a completely different environment. I mean, the point of this is that this is, remember, if you know anything about Bihar, it is not just India's poorest state, it's one of India's most patriarchal states. It's highly caste-ridden, a long history of caste violence. And this is where this has happened. In other words, these cultural constraints to development with concerted effort can be changed. That's what the phase 1 of JEEVIKA shows us, okay? And the data show that as well. If you want me to go into what Judith Butler says about this, I'm happy to, but I will reserve that for academic audiences, okay? That's a joke, but please don't read Judith Butler. It's very hard. Anyway. Okay, let's go to phase 2. And this is a randomized control trial. Now, my JPAL friends will tell me that was, a less effective methodology. This is a much better methodology. True. I don't think the results would have been very different. I don't think methodology is driving the difference. Anyway, it's a very well implemented RCT. Look at the RCT results. Phase 2. Phase 1, you saw the results. This is phase 2. I mean, you get some sort of effect on savings. The difference is 300% to 60% change. The timeline is a little smaller. Remember, it's 2 years versus 5 years. That makes a bit of a difference. Absolutely no effect on anything and empowerment. Results are not as hot by any means. Not useless, but not as hot. Yeah? What happened? Firstly, remember, it's a shorter time period. You had less time, and that's important. But there was a third aspect to this. Third aspect was what was very clear from our qualitative data, difference in implementation quality. Remember, the program size doubled from 300,000 to 700,000. Yeah? And that, we believe, was very, very centrally important in this. What went wrong? There was an enormous amount of political pressure from Nitish Kumar, the Chief Minister of Bihar, to expand this program very, very fast. They did not have the staff to do this properly. I mean, it's a common problem in development, I'm sure. You've never done this, of course. And a large number of new staff are hired, and they were set out to do their work without a proper MI system in place. When the program was small, phase 1, it had a good MI system, not very high-tech, paper-based, but they actually had some data coming in once a month. Yeah? They had absolutely no data. They were running blind. Okay? Poor process monitoring. This other aspect of everyday monitoring is not just MIS stuff, but to do qualitative work to sort of figure out what the management bottlenecks. Very bad process monitoring. And what are the insights from our qualitative research? How does this affect things? If you look at the initial mobilization of the women into groups, in phase 1, it was done with a very careful power analysis in the village. Who are the various power players? I mean, who's talking to whom? Who's not talking to whom? How do we get ourselves into this village knowing the power structure? Here you basically went and said, come to our project, you'll become, you'll get all sorts of nice benefits. I mean, basically bribing them with speech. Yeah? Phase 1, the social mapping, or those of you in community development know what social mapping is, was done very, very thoroughly to really take the site of knowledge production, that is to sort of tell the groups that this is your project, it's a self-empowering project, and teach them, give them the capacity to do it by themselves. In phase 2, social mapping was essentially done as a way of poverty mapping, figure out who the poor folks are, and that's it, none of this other stuff. Self-help was the end goal in phase 1. Making jobs, the lower interest rates was the end goal in phase 2. In other words, it was not a self-actualization goal, it was very much a target-oriented goal. In phase 1, the first movers, the first people they contact became the eyes and ears for the community. And in phase 2, they become the eyes and ears of the facilitators. They don't work for the community, they work for the project. Yeah? So the whole thing becomes a classic case of scaling up and therefore losing a lot of the heart of the project. At the group mating phase, this idea of rituals, that was very important to phase 1. They talked about rituals are seen as burdens. Let's get, too much of a hassle. Yeah? These songs are important. They may sound hokey, but the fact that we're sitting, think of the Aga Khan Foundation, sitting in this beautiful building, talking about development makes a difference, trust me. Yeah? And these symbols are terribly important. The Aga Khan program knows that more than anybody else. This is important. They lost all this aspect. Yeah? Community ownership, the project was taken very literally in phase 1. It was taken as rhetoric in phase 2. Basically, they did not pay enough attention, enough of the little detailed groundwork, the intricate, filigree work that is necessary to make community development projects work on the ground did not happen in phase 2. It was done much more crudely. And therefore, what we can say from the qualitative work is that, guys, you did not have your MIS system in place. You did not have your process monitoring in place. You were not able to see what your village facilitators, your lowest level project folks were doing in place. That's why your program didn't work as well. So that's our feedback to the project, which is what then got them to do this big thing in Nalanda that I told you about, right? So we were able to, the project, and the other part of this, bad news, everybody's saying this now. We said it before everybody else. Failure is not a bad thing. You learn from it, right? And they really took that to heart. They were not disheartened. I've been presenting these results just as I'm doing here to them. They're not cursing me out and saying, you can't come back here. They're kind of trying to learn from what I'm presenting. That change in culture is very important, okay? All right, so that's so much for long-term feedback. I'm doing this there are various papers you can read on this. This is done very briefly. I'm going to go to all three aspects of this. I'm going to go next to everyday feedback. Now, what I'm going to do here is talk about the principles of it. Then I want to show you a video. But because of the shortness of time, how much time do I have, Nathan? Okay, because of the shortness of time, that's a 10-minute video. If I have time, I'll show it to you. If I don't, I will ask you to go see it on the website, okay? So let me just go through the principles, and the video shows you actually how we actually did it, right? Now, everyday feedback is basically this idea of process monitoring and combined with MIS, Management Information System, and decision support systems. And the example I've got there in the video is where we did it for a community-based nutrition program in Bihar, and the various sort of mobile-based alerts we based this on. It's about a 10-minute video. I'm going to see if I have time at the end to come back to this, if you don't mind. Yeah? And if there are questions, we can also see it then. Let me go to the stuff, the final thing, which is citizen feedback, which is this method we've developed called participatory tracking in the state of Tamil Nadu, in the south, which is the other place we work in. I'm working on a paper on this. Now, let me ask, how many of you know about PRAs, participatory rapid appraisal? Oh, good, well, I still have to explain it. Now, participatory rapid appraisal is, so let's start with what the problem is. I've spent, like so many researchers, a good chunk of my life conducting surveys, as I'm sure many of you have. What is a survey? A survey is you sit in this beautiful building or buildings like this, come up with a questionnaire, and maybe go to the field to pre-test it a bit, get an appropriate sample, collect the data, bug the heck out of some poor family for 3 hours, 4 hours. They're answering these questionnaires. The data is collected. You hire some big fancy PhD economist to sit and analyze that data, produce a report or a paper, give it back to you. And you say, okay, this is what I've learned. This is how I'm going to change policy. And the beneficiaries who spent whose time you wasted don't necessarily benefit directly from all that data collection. Yeah? It's a very top-down version of research, right? And I've been deeply frustrated by this for many years, as have been many people, particularly Robert Chambers at the University of Sussex, who developed something called participatory rapid appraisal methods, which were basically simple tools, graphic tools, very crudely done. Basically, you draw, various types of circles and twigs. You work with twigs and various kinds of things to give poor folks who are not necessarily literate the ability to analyze their own living conditions and come to solutions that might work for the community by themselves, right? So it's an empowering form of things that the expert is sort of cut out from that. As many people have argued, when participatory, our PRA's participatory rapid appraisal method started back in the late 70s, early 80s, they were amazing things. As they've been scaled up, as they've been used for larger and larger projects, and the Aga Khan rule support programs use them all the time, they've started losing their flavor. Instead of being participatory and empowering, they've become tools by which the top collects data from the bottom. It's like another version of a focus group, really what they've become. Yeah? So what we said is that now we're in a world where we can know how to visualize data, we know how to collect data electronically. Surely these kinds of tools can help us reinvent the PRA a little bit. That's what we set out to do. So at the end, what we're working with is a pilot of 32,000 women in the state of one district, in Theni district in Tamil Nadu. The government has been very interested in extending this to the whole state of 10 million women, and we might do that. We've not done that yet, but I'm talking about the pilot. Yeah? There are 3 steps to this. The first step, remember, this is democratizing data. Let's go back to Lincoln, by the people, for the people, of the people, right? What does by the people mean? I shouldn't be sitting in my office in Washington figuring out what somebody's well-being is or how to measure somebody's well-being. It's not something a professor can tell me. I mean, if you ask me what my well-being is, I have a certain sense of what matters to me, as I'm sure all of us do. Yeah? Let us get that conception of the good life, as the philosophers call it, to emerge from deliberative discussions in the communities themselves. So that's what we use, this network of self-help groups, looking at 1 million women in Tamil Nadu, to have them speak to each other in groups over a period of 3 weeks, to have these discussions. What are our aspirations? What does it mean to us? What does development mean to us? What do we want as a better life? From those free-ranging discussions, we did this in 2 districts, in Theni district and Tirunelveli district in Tamil Nadu. They came into the next phase, which is to think about indicators. okay, we have these conceptions of good life. Now let's think about what are the indicators that we would use to measure these things. Come up with the indicators, another 2 weeks. Another 2 weeks after that, the 3-month discussion overall. Start thinking about questions that you would use to measure those indicators that you could ask your fellow people in your village. Okay? What questions resonate with them? And then you develop a questionnaire. And then we worked with them to say, I mean, as all of us do, they had 3-hour questionnaires. They said, no, it should be no more than half an hour to implement. So they honed those questions down to half an hour, right? And that's pre-tested by the community for the community. What makes these questions different? You compare them to the standard national sample survey in India, which is the way that household data are collected in India. There is about a 17% overlap between the questions that these women came up with and what the government of India thinks are important indicators of well-being, right? If you compare it to the World Bank's Living Standards and Measurement Survey, the overlap is a little bit bigger, but still there's only a 70% overlap. But that, of course, is not done in India. Covers a range of themes: livelihoods, economic welfare, food security, nutrition, empowerment, access to public services, and political participation, but a very important difference in framing and emphasis. Now, let's compare these questions. The food and nutrition question in a standard questionnaire: how much do you spend on the purchase of vegetables in a month? What do these women say? Does the person who eats last get enough to eat? Remember, in rural Indian families, the mother is the one serving everybody, and then she eats. What if the mother goes hungry? So, we're asking them that question. That's how they devise it. What was their age at the time of marriage? And a standard question. Was your decision taking into account at the time of your marriage? And importantly, because these folks often marry cousins and uncles, nieces, and so on, did you marry a relative? Yeah? Empowerment. Who makes decisions on assets and loans in your family? This is the standard questionnaire in the DHS, for instance. Question here. Do you decide on what clothes to wear based on your own preferences? Have there been any instances of violence against women in your village? Thirdly, totally different category, digital participation. Can you use a mobile phone on your own? Can you read and send text messages? I had nothing to do with this. My team had nothing to do with this. These are questions that women have come about by themselves to track what they think is important. Yeah? Now, that's the first step, the design of the questionnaire. The second step is on data collection and management. This was completely participatory. What we did, the part that we played, was to put this questionnaire on a tablet, give a tablet to every village in our sample, which is basically every village in the district, yeah? And that was using this CAPI-based method, which is electronic-based method data capture. The questionnaires in the tablet, the program, the app that we developed kept it very simple. There were no complicated skip patterns. If there were, very easy to train. We used video-based training. We didn't go to every village, and there were several hundred villages we had to go to. We did not go to every village. We developed video-based trainings. We could just show them a video, figure out how to use the tablet. Yeah, so it didn't require much manpower. They then used the tablet themselves to survey themselves. Again, if you want to see a video of this, please go to our website. We have nice videos of all this stuff. That data collected on that tablet was dispatched directly to a cloud server without any human intervention. So nobody could corrupt the data between the respondent and the analyst. Okay? So data collection and management was extraordinarily simplified and implemented and managed using the women's networks entirely. Thirdly, the point of data visualization. So I'm now going to show you the third and what I think is perhaps one of the most important steps in all of this. Okay. Now, I worked with a wonderful young woman called Cassandra Shea, who was from the MIT Media Lab and now, I'm proud to say, works for Google. And we were in the field for 3 weeks. So Cassandra combines tremendous programming skills and training she's got a master's in statistics, with the ability to draw, which is a kind of a very interesting bunch of skills. And we tried to develop these, and my colleague Netra Palaniswamy as well was very centrally involved in this. We tried to develop these visualizations that resonated with the women. And we cross-checked them, we tested them. And women would say, that face you got there, that doesn't look like any kind of Tamilian I've ever met. Give that man a mustache, give that woman a bindi, that kind of stuff. So the first scene you see, and I'm going to here compare two villages because that's how the villages would see the data, where they're comparing their own village to another village they see as a reference village. So you can see that. You can also see it with the entire sample. This is the real data, by the way. I've not made this. This is actual data. So the first thing they see is this village scene. And see these things. I don't know if my mouse will go across, but you see various aspects of the village scene. You see, for instance, whoa. You see, for instance, a little pen with a cow, with a goat, with a house. Those are assets, asset-based questions. I'll show you that in a second. You see a banana tree. Those of you who know South India know that people eat food on a banana leaf. That banana tree is their food nutrition consumption. You see a woman holding a tablet. That's the mobile-based questions I showed you. You see a woman on a scooter with a man behind her, which they developed, by the way. That shows you the extent to which her mobility, her ability to travel freely. See a woman handling cash. It's obvious what that's about. The intra-household bargaining. She's talking to her husband there. The community-based stuff around the well. And you see a toilet. That's sanitation. Let me show you how so this is actual data, okay? We're visualizing the data back to the members so they can see what the data is saying so they can understand them. Remember, we're talking about people who are 70% signature literate. That means 70% of them can sign their own names. So we're talking about very low levels of education and literacy. Yeah? Let's go to the banana leaf one because, there's also this one. Okay, and this is a flower bed. I'll show you. Let's go to the flower bed. I think that's really cool, right? Hey, there we are. All right. Now, this is a visualization. Those of you, how many of you have taken the data graphics courses? Anybody? Just one or two. Okay. This is you might know a stem and leaf diagram. Okay. Think of an Uber stem and leaf diagram. It's so cool, right? The height of the flower is the age at marriage. If the flower is red, you've married a relative. If the flower is yellow, you've not married a relative. If the flower is a bud, your opinion wasn't taken to marriage when your marriage was arranged. If your flower is open, you were asked, is that man good for you or not, right? The number of leaves is the number of kids you had, right? Compare these two villages, Agamalai and Okarapatti. This, by the way, is everybody in the village, right? And look at it. You immediately see that Okarapatti is far more likely. You don't have to be very well educated for this. They're more yellow than red there. In other words, most of them are marrying non-relatives. But in the tribal village, they're all marrying relatives. There are less kids in Okarapatti than Agamalai. Agamalai has more kids. Age at marriage is higher. Yeah? So you immediately see, aspirationally, remember, we're collecting this data every year so that they're tracking themselves. Okay? In the current period, we want to be like this village. We're not doing very well. Yeah? Okay, let's go back to the main screen now. Okay, and now let's go to intra-household bargaining. Various questions. Was your opinion accepted and related to your child's education and marriage? What do you see here? Think of the visualization. If the woman's face is big, her opinion was taken more into consideration. If the man's face is big, his opinion was taken more into consideration. The in-laws are there somewhere in the background. If their face is big, it's all about basically run by the in-laws. Okay? And what do you see? That interestingly and conversely to the marriage issue, in Agamalai, the women are far more powerful inside the household. Yeah? Across those 4 or 5 categories. Take a look. And you don't have to be very fancily educated with, a master's degree in statistics to look at this data. That's what's extraordinary, but that was the sweet spot that we're trying to hit. And it worked really well. Let's go to another one. Let's now look at the banana leaf, which is a nutrition question. Again, comparing these two villages, the eggplant is the consumption of vegetables, the chicken is consumption of meat, the papaya is the consumption of fruit, and rice is the consumption of rice. And what do you see? You see the folks in Agamalai are, on average, better fed than the folks in Okarapatti, and the distribution of food is more equal than in Okarapatti. So this modernized village where they don't marry relatives is more unequal and worse fed. Okay? Let's go back and look at another one. And by the way, this is exactly the conclusions they came to. And I'm sure it's the conclusion you would come to if I wasn't here. Even if I wasn't here. Let's go and look at sanitation. How am I doing for time, Nathan? All right. One interesting question the women asked, do you use sanitary napkins? Form of empowerment. Yeah? And, of course, open defecation. And you see in Okarapatti, they're all not defecating in the open because this was the kind of the way Cassandra described it. I mean, I don't use Instagram. She did. She said, it's like an Instagram filter. Okay, remember, you're talking about a 25-year-old kid. So apparently, that's what you do in Instagram. You can use these filters to change how your pictures look. And that's what we used here, which is basically the greener the data, the better it is. Okay, you don't have to look at the numbers. You don't have to look at a bar chart. You can just look at the color of the shade. And you sort of see in both these categories, Okarapati does better than Agamalai. It's much greener on both the sanitary napkins and on the open defecation. And you can see that also shows up in the bar charts, which we have on the left in case you want to look at more conventional ways of looking at the data. Okay, let me just show you one more and I'll be done with it because, let me just stop there. We looked at assets, we looked at a whole bunch of different things. But you see the idea, the key idea, let's go back to the presentation. Sir, let's go back to the presentation. Thank you. The key idea is that you use the visualizations to make the data easy to understand by the community. It was the same principle that Robert was trying to develop in his PRA, except we're now using very sophisticated, this is all on Google Chrome, on an Android app, which is available freely to everybody, and it's easy to use. And let's go back to the spot where we left off, which was where the picture was, right there. Thank you. Okay. So you saw the visualization. Let's now go to the data feedback process. It's okay to look at the data. How are you going to use the data to make a difference? This is where we develop a system of data feedback. Because remember, India has the village governance system, as I said. These village organizations look at the data presentation is done. As I said, we've documented all this in the video, which you're free to see. And then they discuss from these, what are the priorities of the village? How do we make our village better? How do we spend up the village budget? What sort of village action plan are we supposed to prepare? Let's go and present it to the village government. And you have this enormously interesting discussion with the village president and these women, figuring out, on the basis of our data, this is what we need to do, and the priorities are changed as a result of that. That's the data feedback process. It affects actual decisions that are made, identifying what the issues are that the self-help group in the village have to think about. It changes the conversation on the basis of data that they've collected. That's one of the extraordinary things about it. Okay? Now, participatory tracking can be used for a variety of different purposes, but to me, the most interesting purpose is that it creates a citizen-based, data-centered narrative. Yeah? Citizens have access to the same data or similar data that the government does that they have collected, so they don't have to listen to what the government says without countering that with an argument based on data. It completely changes the conversation. You can do this for a variety of different things. This is one application that we've used it for. Now, should I show a 10-minute video or no? Probably not, right? Okay, yeah. Well, we're running out of time. Let's come back, yeah. And, so what are the challenges of doing this stuff? Well, I'm sorry about the video thing. That's 10 minutes, and it means that I can't take your questions. So we have some time at the end. I'll go back to that. What are the challenges? We all talk about learning from success and failure. When talking to project managers, both at the highest levels of the World Bank, as well as lower levels of the World Bank, highest levels of the Government of India, lowest levels of the Government of India, everybody is rewarded for success. So the biggest problem we faced was not coming up with these ideas, it was getting folks to be nice to us. Yeah? And if we didn't have the support of the Vice President of the South Asia region, we could have never done this. It had to come from the top. She wanted that change to happen. Yeah? That's the biggest. It's institutional incentives. That really is the biggest problem we face. Second problem, the project director at the local level matters an awful lot. If that person is open to these ideas, it happens. If the person is not open to it, it does not happen. So personnel changes can make all the difference. Our personal change, big personal change happened in both up. We were there for 4 years. You can imagine personal change that happened. It changes everything. You kind of have to step back, convince these folks again. That institutional culture has to change. I don't care in which development agency it is. It's all the same. And I think it kills development. Yeah? We have to learn by doing. And to learn by doing, we have to accept the fact that sometimes that learning is from success and sometimes it's from failure. And it's cool. You should be rewarded for collecting that information and learning from it rather than for always producing the big bang success, which is not going to happen every time. And if it happens every time, start suspecting the data. Yeah? Funding is a big issue. I mean, this whole thing was funded by, as it happened, DFID. my time and the time of my gang. It was not funded by the project. So, well, let me put it differently. DFID funded the time of my staff, yeah? And my entire budget for the 4 years was about $1.5 million. For every dollar that DFID gave us, we were able to leverage $4 from the project's M&E budgets. Okay? Projects have large M&E budgets that are largely unused or misused. Those can be used better. We acted as a sort of a catalyst. Yeah? That is where I think every development agency has to think about how do we catalyze that difference. If everybody agrees that this stuff is important, it can happen, you know, and that's really an issue. But it's a big issue of who pays. So conclusion, I have an enormous respect for these projects because they allowed us in. This is a pilot thing. Nobody's ever done this kind of thing before, not like this. Yeah? They were very open and brave to let us in and observe them from such close quarters. Secondly, it's extremely difficult to get implementation right in the field for large, complex, large-scale projects. We know that. And being embedded has been very critical to us. But what I'm perhaps proudest of, in Bihar in particular, if you've talked to Tinisani, who some of you might know, who works at the JEEVIKA project now, they want to do the impact evaluations now. They want the quality. They got the IDS Sussex coming there. They got JPAL coming in there. They wouldn't have been doing this if we hadn't been there for 4 years, changing the culture of how to do adaptive delivery. They want it for themselves. They see the value of it. Yeah? That's the biggest success we've had. We walked out of there. We're not there. I still have a couple of folks. We finished this big MIS thing. But once we're done with that, I'll be just engaging with them as a friend rather than as an active participant. But we've left a culture behind that I'm very proud of that has changed things. Yeah? So I'm going to stop there. I would like to show you that video if we have time, but we'll see about that. But you know, all of this stuff is available on our website, which is econ.worldbank.org/Social Observatory. If you just Google Social Observatory, World Bank, it pops right up. And there are a bunch of videos there they can see and all this stuff that we've done, some writing, some articles, and you know. But let me stop there and take your questions. Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much. That was really stimulating, inspiring, and thanks to the Aga Khan Foundation. My name's Ted Patterson. I'm a development consultant. I work mainly in mine action, landmines. But we get involved a lot in rural development and livelihoods frameworks and that type of thing. Very early on, you had the phrase, you know, put up or shut up. Unfortunately, we're used to hearing the second half of that more often than the first half. So that's a bit of a hurdle. And the other thing is, this is a $2 billion portfolio of programs. And so the scale has allowed you to do some really quite remarkable and encouraging things. But, you know, for the mere mortals among us who, you know, don't command $2 billion portfolios. Have you thought about how organizations like international NGOs or can make use of some of the insights you've learned?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take 2 or 3 questions.
Oh, you can take 2 questions. I'm Jane Parpart. I'm an academic who's been working and writing in gender and development since the 80s. And thank you for a very inspiring talk. It's wonderful to see this. I have 2 questions. One is a scholar on development called Josephine Leroy Fonderson did some work in Cameroon, a critical ethnographic studies of women involved in the BRAC form of self-help groups. She discovered that quite a lot of the women felt that they were being sort of forced into having to cooperate, and they felt that they were constantly being placed in a situation where they had to agree with the group rather than have a chance to really express any kind of alternative points of view. And she has written a number of important articles, but I think this has often been seen as in a rather critical and skeptical way. So I'd like to know what you think about it. I have one other question, which is a statistical or a fact. in 2006, it was my understanding that when I was in Bangalore that women are at the local level in politics, but not at the national level. Is that still true, that there are no women in Parliament?
Thanks. I'll take one more. Can I take, maybe, if I can ask you to keep your questions very short. So, yeah, thank you.
Sampe Lalong, I'm a development professional. I've worked a lot in South Asia. 3 years in India, Nalanda. I know quite well because with UNICEF we had programs, and Tamil Nadu. 2 questions. Knowing the dynamics in Bihar and the political and caste dynamics, you'd mentioned that there were Brahmins and Dalits and other castes, but the fundamental cutting edges, of conflict between the Yadavs and the Dalits. And did this project over time show any lessening of that? Because that is a very powerful political area that manifests, as you know, politically. And the other one has to do with the fact that these large, I think in your question here, if you look at the larger programs, Narega, for instance, because in India, Narega is billions and billions of government revenue budget. How are the lessons of this being transmitted to those large-scale projects? And Narega is just one of them. There are a couple of others that I think would benefit tremendously.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let me take those 3 very interesting set of questions. So, on the first question, yes, remember, it's a $2 billion portfolio, but I worked in 2 states. So I worked in about a fourth of that portfolio. But the point is this, every development project I know, even the smallest NGO has an M&E budget. Yeah? And it's usually between 2 to 10% of the project budget. Yeah? And I think those numbers are about right. Now, as it happens, the smaller the project, the larger the percentage should be devoted to M&E, and I think it's central that it be devoted. The lesson you would draw, if you're not doing things at scale, if you're working in 10 villages, you don't need this stuff. Please don't even go there. It's a waste of time. Yeah? You can do this by yourself. If you're going to 100 villages, you need it. If you're going to 1,000 villages, you need it for sure. Not maybe the particular tools I'm talking about there, except the MIS stuff. If nothing else, please have a decision support system and a process monitoring system, and make it accurate and reliable. Lots of people can advise you about how to do that. And you don't see it happening anywhere. Yeah? So to me, that's very basic stuff. And the process monitoring, which is the qualitative part, and the MIS data will give you the quantity and the qualitative data. And businesses do it all the time. Why don't development projects do it? Why do we keep having to hide the actual reality of what's going on with our projects? That's the only lesson I would give. The other stuff, the participatory tracking stuff, has applications across the board in all kinds of things. And it's not just for livelihoods groups. I think, for instance, I've been talking to folks in Colombia with their peace process. They're trying to set up a deliberative system of government in the conflict-related areas. I've been trying to talk to them about sort of seeing whether this can be used to sort of bring those views in, and to measure things where census people can't go, so that kind of stuff. The government of Tamil Nadu wants to use this for village planning processes throughout the state. It can be used for all kinds of things. So I think that has broader relevance. Second thing, on this issue of, one of my research assistants some time ago was a fellow called Radu Ban, who now works at the Gates Foundation, lovely guy, who happens to be Romanian. So when he first saw these projects, he went in and said, "Pichu, this is communism." So I can see where that view comes from. When these things are done well, there's a certain transformative aspect to it that really is quite wonderful. And it's all voluntary. Nobody's being forced to enter these groups, not by this project, right? And I don't know about her work with the BRAC projects in other places. I don't want to comment on that because I just don't know. In our projects that we looked at, no one is being forced into these things. Yeah? As the projects expand, if it's done blindly with target-oriented objectives, you're told, the IAS of the Indian Administrative Service Office is told, go and do this, and make sure that 10,000 women enrolled. That's when the coercive aspects start coming in. Then you're destroying what it's about. Yeah? So, having said that, I should also say, having been at both ends of this academic and non-academic life, academics, particularly from anthropology, like to find stuff to criticize. That's their bread and butter. And they sometimes do it very well and very insightfully, but they get tenure doing that. So I I think there are two sides to every story. And I'm seeing that on YouTube. Hello. Okay. Now, Yadavs versus, on the local versus, yes. So there's reservations for women in local politics. That's why women come in. So that's why there's so many, 33% reservations, 50% in Bihar, brings a lot of women. And we don't have that in national elections yet. It's coming in. And as it comes in, it's going to get different. But that's true. There are some very powerful women in Karnataka politics, which is my state. So I kind of know that. Yadavs versus Dalits, it's cross-cutting. I'm not asked the question whether it reduces. Yadav-Dalit conflict is no longer the situation in Bihar like it was even 10 years ago. They're political conflicts. But it's not, killing each other kind of conflicts. Those are they're still there, but they're much less than they used to be. I'm not sure this project is making a difference to that, but it is cutting across boundaries amongst Yadav and Dalit women. They're working together in the same groups. That's a big change. Now, what is the rest of the government learning from these projects? That's beyond my control. And let me just say this and say it carefully because I know I'm being videotaped. Some governments are more open to learning about the truth of their projects than others. All governments are very careful. So that's a political problem. If that problem doesn't go away, development is not going to be effective. So, okay.
Dal brought it here.
My name is Dal Broadhead. I've worked in community development in particular, both domestically and overseas. I guess my question is relates to something you said earlier on when you commented that replication, in fact, I'm putting it too simply, but replication ended up in a drop in quality. I wonder whether because we run across this, particularly in Canada, where replication actually meant to funders and to governments a cheaper version. More people, but not continuing to invest at the same level. And it strikes me that your comment, I'd just be interested in your comment on that, because we found that was fairly devastating. Those two things together took the bottom right out of the development.
Hi, I'm Charles Morrow. I'm a retired communication director from the World Health Organization. It's a bit of a supplementary question regarding the challenge here. I wonder if you could point to any examples among the bilateral agencies or perhaps some of the specialized agencies of the UN where these approaches have been adopted, rather, having in mind that the major obstacle here is the fact that participatory development is a very messy, costly, and difficult process at best. And many of these approaches founder upon the rock of the reluctance of project planners and project implementers, not least so-called executing agencies, to adapt a more participatory and truly developmental approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take these two questions and we'll have more. I mean, what can I say? You're right. I guess what I'm trying to offer is some solutions to that conundrum. Expansion is going to involve less money because there are budget constraints, and I get that. What I'm saying is that if you want to expand and you set up certain basic systems in place, you're going to do better than if you don't. And I'm not on a randomized trial on that, but there are some people at JPAL who actually are doing a randomized trial. We'll wait to see the results, right? The basic setting up of a management information system that works. I mean, this should be routine. I mean, the soap guys do it. The toothpaste guys do it. Why don't we do it in development? And do it well. We all talk about doing it. You'll find a whole bunch of MIS consultants sitting in Ottawa, I'm sure, right? Do they actually make sure that the project is actually taking their wonderful designs and doing it right? Waiting for the right data to come? I mean, for God's sakes, this to me is ABCD. I mean, you have to do it, right? So that will make all the difference. And you won't get to the point where the initial thing happened. It'll never be that good, perhaps, because that's also sort of a bit of excitement when you do that. People are intrinsically motivated. That's going to reduce. And the second thing is the incentives. We need to change our incentives. Stop rewarding the everyday development worker for showing good results all the time, okay? Or showing off about their results all the time. Reward the development worker for setting up systems in place so they can do their development job better, whether it's good or bad. Sometimes spaces are really difficult to work at. You've got to factor that in when you promote somebody. Yeah? I mean, you send somebody to the easiest place and they do great work. Yeah, wonderful, but that's how careers are made in development. That cannot go on. I mean, that's part of the problem. So I would refer you to my book. I mean, not that I want you to read it, but that's what we looked at very carefully around the world in participatory projects, community development projects around the world, bilateral, multilateral, World Bank, everybody. And they all do it badly. Yeah, they all do it badly. They don't do it as well as they can. The reason is that they do not set up these adaptive systems well. Yeah? You see some short-term successes. I mean, there are many evaluations that show positive results. There's a lot of evidence to show that those results disappear after a few years. Yeah? It's like bursting a balloon. You get everybody all excited, then you pull all the money out, it goes away. Yeah? And there's always this up and down that goes on. Some governments are all for it. The new government, Pakistan China, good countries of this. You have a huge amount of decentralization because one prime minister or president supports it, then it disappears. And that kind of bursts another bubble. I'll never forget going to Jamaica in 2000 when we started doing a participatory project. And we were recruiting folks from the Jamaica Welfare Association. This was in 2000, and they were active in the 1960s. And they were people in their 70s and 80s. These were our community leaders and they were so happy that something had come back. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, these up and down fashions, this is to be a cumulative, slow process where we go and struggle through the ups and downs and get it better and better. Otherwise, there's no point doing them. Yeah? It's a waste to build a bridge. Give people nutrition supplements. Do something else. Not this stuff. This stuff requires constant adaptive engagement. Yeah.
Biju, can I just push you on your MIS point? So you guys have been through this now in Bihar. You said it took 3.5 years. So you have your own answer, I think, embedded in that experience about why it is that it's done so poorly in development. So why is it? You're right. We've got MIS consultants running around doing all kinds of stuff. Why is it that we see this done so poorly, so frequently? What is your diagnosis, and then what is your remedy? What's your advice to practitioners in the audience about what it takes to do this well?
The short answer, I mean, I know the World Bank better than other places, so I'm going to speak from that perspective. I'm sure that you can figure out parallels other places. In the World Bank, there's something called a project appraisal document, the PAD, which is the design document for the project, and that says you have to have an MIS system. And so that triggers hiring an MIS consultant to get it done. The internal evaluation group, the IEG, that goes back and assesses these projects later on, checks to see whether that MIS was done and whether the system was in place, and might do a field visit to see, is there an MIS system? Nobody's checking to see whether that wonderfully designed MIS system is actually used, right? That's part of the problem, right? And so the systems aren't there. In other words, nobody cares. You want to see that MIS is done, nobody cares to see if it's actually being used. That's A. Secondly, the MIS itself, I mean, it's basically a hard problem to do it right. In Bihar, I mean, we were working at it. And the project director, Arvind Chaudhary, who then went on to become Rural Development Secretary, which is what he's now, correctly felt that let's design this right so we can expand it easily. Yeah? He didn't want to do it just for that project. So he said we need to do it electronically. We're working in a state which has very poor connectivity. I mean, it has phone connectivity, but internet connectivity is bad, and very bad electricity problems. Right? You're working with low levels of literacy. So that became a big challenge in its own right. How do we get that connectivity problem solved? We finally solved it using all kinds of, finding the right kind of firm. But then the problem became, and the biggest problem was the hurdle, how do we minimize the time between the collection of data and making the data available, right? That problem was finally solved, and because everybody wanted to go back and backtrack and get all the old data that they had, enter it all, and get this long-term. I said, no. Have a cutoff point. Let's start from scratch. Let's forget what happened in the past. And that sort of helps solve the problem to some extent. But then getting that system in place where the women are entering the data, or the data is being entered in the village, and it is electronically being made available via the cloud into a database, became the hardest problem to solve because of the connectivity problem. Finally, they found this sort of system by which you take a flash drive, put it in, somebody takes a hard drive, CD takes it elsewhere. I mean, they figured it out. The gap is now a week. Yeah, and that's, I think, extraordinary. It's gone down from 6 months to a week. The third problem was the dashboards. You have all the data being collected. How do we present it back? And that's what my guy, Upamanyu Datta, who, by the way, is looking for a job. He's a great guy. PhD in the University of Maryland. Wonderful, but the best MIS, ground-level MIS guys I know. He's been working on developing dashboards for this whole system, yeah? And has really finally pulled it off. And it has required him sort of basically living in Patna for 3 years to get it done. Because you have to keep testing it. It has to resonate with the local level sort of bureaucrat who's trying to get this to happen. Finally, they've pulled it off, yeah? So it is a hard problem. And the third reason, I would say, how do I put this? You're talking about a very ineffective state, largely, in India. I mean, there are lots of problems with the state. Whatever problems you see in the government, you see in the MIS system as well. Because the MIS system, at the end, judges people, right? In the state of Tamil Nadu, in our project, even though we had worked out the back end so that the data were accurate, the front end was often fiction because the guy in charge of the MIS had power over that system. And it could sell good results, if you wish. Yeah? So that became the challenge. And that's not, we don't have the mandate to solve that challenge. Right? That's a political mandate. So, you know, there are all these challenges with this stuff. It goes back to if development agencies like yours and ours make this a priority, I think it can change. That's, yeah.
Do you feel like you've solved this once and for all, or does this have to be context-specific every time? I mean, you've done a lot of heavy lifting here in Bihar. What is the external validity of the process you've gone through? How much of this is technical, is another way of asking this question. How much of this is a social emergent process in the project itself?
I think we've solved the technical problem. We can solve it in Bihar, we can solve it almost anywhere, and I think my guys can offer advice on that. The social problem and the incentives problem, I don't think we've solved at all. I mean, I think we were lucky to have Arvind in charge of the JEEVIKA project and to have Parmesh Shah from the World Bank being the World Bank guy. I mean, you have two great guys there that I'm working with and who are willing to argue with me but not kill me while arguing with me. And we were able to solve that problem. It's a sweet spot we were in, you know. And I'm very lucky. I mean, we have other places that were not so sweet spots that we walked away from. I won't tell you what they are. So that really matters. So yeah, there is an external validity problem. I don't deny that. Yeah.
Doug Ward had a question, and we've got time for a couple more.
And there's one back there as well. Yeah.
Doug Ward, Farm Radio International. Thank you for some very stimulating ideas. I don't know how many of them I can still juggle in my head as I walk out of the room. I don't want to lose any of them. But you're talking about sweet spots, and it seems to me that in this process, one of the very important sweet spots is when this new data about the real situation of women, when that data is evident, and then there is a community meeting at which there's kind of a visioning of what kind of a community you want. Well, there has to be a kind of a magic where the lobbyists win the war, win the battle at least, that the community, which might include a lot of old guys who don't like change, et cetera, they come around and say, yes, we want a revisioned community, and so women, blah, blah, blah. That's almost magical, but it looks like from the data, some of that's happening. Can you just speak a bit more about it? Because I see that as the place where all the work you do in the world, then you have to leave to a process that may or may not work. It's out of your hands.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Let's take the last questions, Mr. Tarif, and then if there's anyone else, this is your chance. Got two questions right here.
Jean-François Tardif, I'm a consultant in international development. I also work with Results International. And I'm very interested because, I'm interested in results, and that's how you show with data. Two big hurdles. First one you mentioned, of course, costs. And how can you build them in? What's the level? Have you, in a project that really touches grassroots, is community-based, et cetera, what's the approximate amount one should budget to get really at the data properly? And what incentives are there to have donors cover those costs, et cetera? So that's one side. The other side is even when you have the systems in place, I had to work in government and outside of government with administrative data or data collected at community levels, and we know they're absolutely unreliable. And the Mexican government publishes data, and it's to the last number of women who have received supplements of this and the children of that. And you all know they're wrong by an order of magnitude. But keep on publishing it, et cetera. What's the incentive that you can build in to make sure that data is of quality? And what are best practices in those areas?
Bijou, we're going to take 3 more questions, and you can answer the ones you like.
Thank you. Jackie Dale. My original career was international development, and now I do most of my work in citizen engagement in Canada. And I've been thinking actively of how I can adapt some of this to work here in Canada. And I'm really was really interested in the in all of the work around the digital visualization that the women themselves were doing, and curious about how much of that was actually co-designed with the women in terms of the imagery used, and also how much of that data flows up to the other levels of data. And does it have much impact in terms of the other 2 levels that you talked about?
Great, thank you. Right here?
Tim Shaw. I've been trying to retire for several years, and most recently have been directing a new PhD in Boston at University of Massachusetts on global governance and human security. Thank you for coming and giving us all a break from filling in our long census forms here, which we all treat as a political act. And it's good data this time because the person who lived down here tried to make it the short data. 2 quick questions, one totally undiplomatic. How does this kind of process and recommendation go down in what I understand is a socially fraught World Bank at the moment? And secondly, you didn't tell us anything about the intersectionality. You keep talking about your guys. Was it just men interviewing women, or was it a lot of this?
Well, I use the word guys like everybody much younger than me, meaning all genders.
Well, but seriously, I would be interested in the degree to which most of the, how can I put it, those doing the work were female rather than male.
My name is Daniel Buckles. I was with the International Development Research Center for many years, and I'm currently at Carleton University here in Ottawa. Your short definition of adaptive capacity or in practice was long-term feedback, everyday monitoring, and citizen feedback. The first 2, long-term and everyday, speak to learning over what time frame. Which I think adaptive learning over what time frame, and I think that's quite key to the notion of adaptive learning. It's not adaptive if it's too long a time frame, et cetera. But your third point about citizen feedback is of different character. So my question would be, why wouldn't citizen feedback be integrated into long-term feedback, everyday feedback? And a PRA updated, I think, would do that. A modern PRA is...
I liked you up to that point.
A modern PRA is about integration.
Right.
So, Bijou, you've got 7 minutes. Answer the easy questions and punt the hard ones.
Okay, let me start from the bottom up. I love your point about citizen feedback being on a separate time frame, a separate category in the first 2 years. Absolutely right. I actually hadn't thought about that, but that's absolutely right. And clearly, citizen feedback. So what P-tracking is basically long-term citizen feedback. Yeah. What is short-term, everyday citizen feedback is, and that goes to your question, I'll keep coming back to your question as you'll see throughout my answers, is based on the Gram Sabha system in India. So the Gram Sabhas, the village meetings, public deliberative meetings, going to citizen engagement. India has the biggest system of deliberative democracy anywhere in the world, and I'm tremendously proud of it. It's part of the Indian constitution. All Indian villages elect a village council, but the parliament of the village is every citizen. And they sit and question the village council, throw up whatever concerns they have, between 2 to 4 times a year, depending on the state. That's the more frequent feedback. And then, of course, they can engage the council anytime you want because they're right there, right? So that proximity of government to the citizen is very, very important there. That's the everyday feedback for the citizen in this case. The long term, because of the state of Tamil Nadu. I mean, other places would be different. So that answers that question. I'm not sure PRAs are the answer. I mean, simply because you cannot do these things at scale well. I mean, I think we need to go beyond them. We need to they've had their run, you know. They've played their game. We need to reinvent them completely. And reinventing them would involve getting away from the song and dance aspect of it, because that only works when you're working with a village at a time. Yeah? So that really has to go away, I think. Coming back to the questions on the World Bank, which I will not answer. And sorry, the second question, which I can't even read my own handwriting. Yeah. So my deputy was a woman. She just quit to go on to bigger and better things. Netra Palaniswamy couldn't have done any of this without her. I was very conscious. I mean, one of the crazy things about livelihoods projects in India is that they're all run by men. The actual implementation, because that's the way not all, but we had a wonderful woman project director in charge in Tamil Nadu, JEEVIKA. As I said, she's the best person I've ever worked with in development. She now runs village government elections in Tamil Nadu. So she's going to go on to bigger and better things. So we had a female project director, a man in Bihar. The World Bank folks were all men. I made a conscious decision to select a large proportion of women in my team. I had 2 men, 8 women, and including the data visualizer, the jock was a woman. So I'm very proud of that, and that was consciously done, and I wouldn't have done it any differently. And that was very important precisely for that reason. Sorry? Oh, absolutely. Not may, did. Yeah. Okay. The core design of the visualization, that was central to it. So the way it worked, just to talk about the process, is that Cassandra and I chatted on the phone. She was somewhere she was in Palo Alto, and we chatted on the phone, and several times. And I'm a big data visualization nerd. QK was my big hero when I was when I was an undergrad. So I'm 52, so I'm a little bit out of date, and she is 26 or something. So we had these long conversations on the phone, and then she sort of would sit down with a pen and paper, draw some pictures, and say, how about this, how about that, and she would program a few things, how about this, how about that, and she came up with a bunch of crude things that could work as concepts, including this idea of the village scene. Then we went to the field for 3 weeks, where these ideas were thrown to village after village, and you had all these women saying, that won't work, how about this one? That flower idea came from the village, where we had the idea of the stem and leaf plot, but then they came up and said, no, think of it this way, let's make those colors red and yellow, how about this kind of flower, that one? It was completely done, co-produced with the communities, not with all the communities, but with selected villages that we went to. It wouldn't have resonated otherwise, The reason it resonates is because it was co-produced. That's very central. And does it have a higher level impact? As I said, the government of Tamil Nadu wants to take this to the whole state. The planning secretary of the government of Tamil Nadu is obviously went and saw it in the field, gotten very excited by this whole thing, and wants to take it forward. So I'm quite confident that they're at least impressed. Whether it'll go forward is another story. The cost question is an important one. Incentives and the validity of data. These are all very, very important questions. Now, the validity and invalidity of data is a vicious circle or a virtuous circle, right? If data is considered valid, it'll be used more. If data is considered crap, it will not be used. Now, we have to change that. We had to change the nature of that circle. And it's not just even though the data is accurate but out of date, it's never used. That's the other problem. So what oftentimes happens with folks who are designing MI systems sitting in Washington, D.C. or Ottawa is that they try to put everything into the MI system because every damn minister wants something in there, The key to a good MI system, I keep making these diagrams, I'm sorry, I'm going to show them, do it with my hands. The way I see an impact evaluation, a big survey that we might do to, track whatever, is that you have a big questionnaire, okay? That big questionnaire results in one paper, one research output. The MIS is exactly the opposite. You collect very little data that can be used for a V. So a variety of different purposes. Oh, that's a nice way, right? So a variety of different purposes. What are those indicators you track? That has to be done with great care, and you cannot overstuff it. In fact, the less, the better. That's part of the reason the data starts getting corrupted, because they can't collect all this damn data. You're just collecting data all the time instead of doing your work. You've got to make data collection an easy task and a necessary task. So the way we did it here was that they fill up these credit forms anyway. That's something they have to do because they have to keep their accounts. Those accounts are our data. That's it. We're just making sure those accounts are transferred electronically. And we do a survey once a year for a profile. What is your livelihood? What occupation? How many kids do you have? This kind of thing. That's the census information. That's tagged to this. That's it. Then for every vertical intervention, you collect the information of that kind. That's going to be collected anyway. So there's no additional burden with the data collection. And the women have every reason to be accurate about it because it's in their interest to do so. And that works out. So that becomes the virtuous cycle. Then the project managers start believing the data. They start looking at it. You don't need to have all this policing with the data validation. Now, the cost, as I said, MIS, M&E budgets are already there in most projects. The trick is to just use them better. And that's the big challenge with this stuff. We were acted as catalysts. I think a good use of time and money is in setting up a unit. I'm not saying I will do it, but you need to set up a unit, setting up a unit like ours, whether at the World Bank or several units like ours in development agencies that catalyze this kind of stuff, that provide advice, technical and otherwise, and then work with others to kind of make this happen. Yeah? Like they do now, except that now it's not done well. And everywhere I go, I've spoken about this stuff now in many places. I find it resonates so much with younger folks in development. Yeah? Because they see how all these crazy tools that they know about can work with this stuff. Yeah? So that's where there's a lot of potential, and to change how development is done. So I don't think it's any additional cost. Is the bottom line. Yeah? It's just using that stuff differently. So that comes to your question: is Tamil Nadu state has a long history of caste reform that goes back 100 years more, and of women's empowerment that goes back almost as long. So we're looking at a place that's women are relatively more empowered than in other parts of India. And that changes the nature of politics. Every time you go to a village meeting in Tamil Nadu, you have women speaking. I mean, that's already there. It's just that these projects made it even better. Yeah? And they were directing their speech in more constructive ways towards discussing the selection of public goods and public money instead of just kind of going off and talking. I've written a lot about this, and so unfortunately you've given a question that I've spent 5 years researching, so I can go on about it for that long, and I don't want to. But it is very important that we're doing this in Tamil Nadu, the P-tracking stuff. In Bihar, we would have done it very differently, yeah, which is a different context. So that's to be kept in mind. A lot of the work had already been done for us. Yeah. Okay.
Biju, someone from the website is just asking for examples of the dashboards. Is it plausible that might be on the website? Or in this video that we can't wait to all get home and watch?
Go to the video. We have dashboards there. Right. We have the mobile dashboards there. I have not put up the MIS dashboards yet. I will put a link to it.
Great. Hamid Ibrahim from the website can wait a couple of days, and then on Biju's website we'll find the link.
Send me an email if a person from the web. Please send me an email if it doesn't happen within 2 weeks.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Biju, we're in your debt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
So, Dr. Rao, we're very much in your debt for that very stimulating presentation. It was insightful, energetic, and deeply provocative on a number of dimensions. I think you saw a lot of nodding heads and half smiles as you talked about some of the challenges of this work. I think we can all relate to it in different ways, and I think you have identified some paths forwards on a lot of different challenges of the actual hard work of doing development, and so for that we are very, very grateful. Dr. Rao will be around for a few more minutes, and we have a reception where you can corner him for more insights. And of course, he's given you the information around the website where you can get more information about all of his extraordinary work. I'll remind you all that this is part of a series on measuring development impact. I think there are cards available on the table at the back, and with Shabana, who is waving in the center aisle, which gives you the upcoming events. The next one is on June 13th, just a month from now, a continuation of our conversation with the Poverty Action Lab. There was a lot of interest in that session. What we have now is one of their sector leads coming up to talk about the actual set of intervention RCTs they have done in the field of health, and so they're going to be actually doing a specific review of specific studies they've done and the conclusions they're drawing from the entire set. So that's on June 13th, and then we start up again in the fall, in September and October. You'll see the events, all fascinating, and I think will be well served by these people coming from around the world to share their expertise and views with us. I hope you'll enjoy the reception and take a few minutes to continue the conversation with your colleagues and with Dr. Rao. Thank you all those who have joined us from around the world, for those of you in Ottawa, and most especially to Dr. Rao. Thank you.